Don't interrupt me, Cornelius.
Calm down, Judas. You're being a cornt.
You did not just call me a cornt.
Cornt.
That's it. I've had it with your conceited attitude and your complete lack of corn passion. You're not convincing me to stay this time. I can't take your twisted stories and your convoluted logic anymore.
Condemn me and complain all you want. Your confidence will run out and you'll be running back to me in no time, especially when you realize nobody will corn you like I do.
If I'm being completely honest, Cornelius, you haven't corned me to completion in years.
Judith, shut your cornhole right now.
I know you always blame it on your, condition, but I know it's really because you have no interest in contributing to my pleasure. You've never really considered me. I've just always been a convenience for you. Well, I'm taking control of my own life now. I just can't take the constant conflict anymore.
Wow, you've really convinced yourself this time, but you and I both know you're lacking the conviction.
Goodbye, Cornelius.
Ring, ring. Hey, got a problem?
Got a gripe?
Got some kudos and love to give? Got something to say?
I need to express myself!
Shout it out loud. Share it with us, possibly the world. Dial 1-220-SP-RADIO.
Share a dirty limerick.
Hey, you got a request? 1-220-SP-RADIO. It's just there. Call us. Ring, ring.
Okay. And we are rolling.
All right. Well, I'm here with Uncle Richard, who is the third youngest of all the Lacys. And
Well, I'm the oldest of the three little ones.
the oldest of the three little ones. So yeah, the different pods, which we'll definitely talk about later. And I think the sixth of the Lacy siblings of my dad and all his brothers and sisters. That I'm trying to interview all of them, so I'm getting down that list now.
So there's eight kids total.
8 kids total. Yeah.
If the math
And I'm
works
pretty
out.
sure I got Doug, I got Steve, I got a third interview with Steve because he wanted another one recently. Julie, Kat, Mike, and then I will have you, and then I'll just need Greg and Joe after that. So yeah, I guess I'll just start. You could just, introduce yourself, saying whatever you want, and the first question I have here is just asking what were some common themes growing up as a Lacy in Cruces.
Okay. Well, my name's Richard Lacy, and I'm Minda's uncle, obviously. So, and I was the what was regarded as the oldest of the three little ones. We kind of came in kind of two major sets. So there was an older group and then the younger tribe, and yeah, so there's a lot of us. And yeah, in terms of, now what was the question? You want to know about themes?
Just like themes, yeah. Well, however you want to answer it. It's no you don't have to be
Okay.
but I guess the general vibe of what that household was like and
Well, we were a big family, and growing up on the edge of a relatively small town. It was small when I was a little kid. So we were on the edge of town, on the edge of the desert. We had the desert and the mountains beyond us, and really, it was about. We didn't have a lot in terms of, like we weren't really well off or even middle class, I would say. So, but I wouldn't have traded the way I grew up for anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine with your parents' professions and just having 8 kids like that, there's no way you're not going to be kind of poor.
Yeah, there was a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
When my dad went to the grocery store, he was the one that usually got the groceries. Mm-hmm. It was usually like a holiday. Yeah. when the groceries would come in, but But yeah, there was definitely that stress. But as kids, you don't really know what you don't have, and so I think it really, in many ways, enhanced the way that we grew up, because we just used the desert as our playground and each other as entertainment, and like I said, I wouldn't have traded it. It was a wonderful, adventurous way to grow up. My dad was a water well driller. He owned, it was called B.D. Lacy and Sons Drilling, and he had a lot of sons, so he had a lot of help. And then my mom worked at White Sands Missile Range for the majority of her life when I was growing up. She did things prior to that, hotel operator. She was also a very skilled writer. I don't know if anyone realizes that.
I never knew that. I've always been wanting to know more about this. I've been asking all of them, like, what were your parents like outside of parents? And
yeah,
all these,
she used to write for the newspaper at White Sands Missile Range. She did an article, and I wish I had some of those, and hopefully we can find some of those someday. But they were always just wonderfully written with great wit. I remember one particular story that she wrote, because she worked at White Sands, which was over what they called the pass, which is the highway that goes over the mountains. So you gain a lot of altitude going up to White Sands from Las Cruces. And it could be treacherous during the wintertime when you had storms. Mm-hmm. And my mom I remember her writing about an episode of trying to get over the pass during a snowstorm and that kind of thing. So that kind of weather and intense happenings like that, my mom would very much react to those kinds of things quite emotionally. I think she, raising 8 kids, she was in a constant state of paranoia.
Yeah, I feel like that's what I remember a lot about her. What I'm trying to pinpoint her personality is how I knew her. She's just very worried all the time about things. But I had no idea she was a writer. I'd love to find some of the stuff that she's written. Yeah. I don't know if she has stuff that's still around. If she had journals and stuff, that'd be pretty cool.
No, she was a really gifted writer, and she was always encouraging of my efforts writing growing up, and so I always thought it was really cool that she wrote for the newspaper. Not a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, no, I haven't. This is the first I've ever heard of it, and that's very cool. But yeah, with both your parents working pretty full time, it seems, I get the idea that you 8 kids were fairly unsupervised most of the time. So.
Yeah, that would be a kind way of putting it. We were definitely unsupervised, and we, I think we thrived on that. Mm-hmm. So I remember my dad used to, before the drilling business, he drove a truck, and so he would drive all night long, and then sometimes would end up back at the house to rest during the day. Mm-hmm. And and he was fairly strict. He was a quiet man, great storyteller, with just a terrific sense of humor. Mm-hmm. But you didn't want to make him mad. You didn't want to make him too mad or push him past that point. Mm-hmm. Now, my mom, she would get mad or upset frequently, but my dad was the one that you feared really the most. But I remember I think I was about 10, 11 years old, but I was obsessed with Evel Knievel. So I went through a period where I wanted to jump my bicycle over virtually anything and everything. So we would build these ramps, and my friend Daryl and I would do these stunts, and jumping over trash cans, fireworks, and sometimes each other. And we I remember one particular time. My dad told me to stop jumping because he was afraid we were going to get hurt. And he said he did not want to see us doing that again. If he did, he was going to kick my ass.
Okay.
But I was addicted to it, so I just couldn't help myself. I was totally into it. I remember I wore my brother's motorcycle helmet and had my dad's welding glasses on, and actually made kind of a uniform. I was so obsessed with Evel Knievel. And I didn't realize that. I thought he was dead asleep, or I didn't even think he realized he was home. But I was in the back of the house, so if you picture this, it was a desert area, but they had recently cleared it out to build these apartments behind my house. And so it was kind of smoothed out ground, and it had a little hill where you could pick up speed on your bicycle. And we had laid out Oh, we were jumping over people at that point. So we had different neighbor kids laid out, about 4 or 5 of them, and then we would put my best friend in a box at the end, and we were jumping over that stuff. Anyway, I came down to do my jump with my welding glasses on and my full motorcycle helmet, and come zipping down, and I look over, and my dad's standing against the fence with his arms crossed watching me. And I got really like totally kind of freaked out, nervous. My feet came off the pedals. I hit the ramp with my butt on the seat instead of up on the pedals.
Because you saw him.
Yeah, because I saw him at free, and I was like, and it was like too late to turn, so I just went over the ramp and nosed it over, hit my front tire, and then my head and chest basically hit the handlebars. I flipped completely over the bicycle and had this spectacular crash. So it was just like this whirl and tumble of bike and limbs. And I ended up, I'll never forget, with the bike on top of me, and the front wheel was above my face. It was turning. And I was just stunned. I was like, my breath was knocked out. I was pretty shaken up. But then I saw my dad's boots kind of walking towards me, his old drilling boots. And so I got up immediately and started dusting myself off. And he looked at me. He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just fine." I said, "I'm never going to do that again." And he said, he had asked me if I'm okay. And I said, "Yes, I'm okay." And he said, "Well, you're not going to be." And he took his belt out and started chasing me around the desert with his belt in hand in front of all the neighbor kids who were watching. But he didn't get me hard or anything, but he definitely meant it when he didn't want me to jump. So that was the last time I jumped. I had planned to jump my bicycle between our houses. So between my house and the neighbor's house.
That probably would have ended in worse injuries than the belt. But
those were the kinds of adventures that we would partake.
Well, he kept his word. He said, "I'll kick your ass if you do it again."
He kicked my ass, yeah.
Yeah.
He chased me around.
Yeah. No, he seemed like the theme I get from a lot of you guys is that is the temper that like you didn't want to set off with. Julie and Steve told the one where he found all the rattlesnakes that were captive, and then he killed them, and then you thought he was like, and you didn't want to get in his way because he thought you were going to come after you with the hoe afterwards. But
yeah, that really scared him. The fact that we had rattlesnakes.
Yeah, you're the first person to describe him as kind of quiet, though. Like I hear all these loud stories about him, but not so quiet.
No, he was quiet until he got loud. But generally speaking, he was pretty quiet, kind of introspective. The thing he and I shared were football games. So every Sunday, growing up, I was kind of the only kid that enjoyed football because of him. So I grew up watching the Cowboys with him, and we shared that for a long time, that common interest. So that was a nice thing that we had together.
That is cool. I do remember at the house in Stall when he was still alive, the house had a very distinct vibe when he was still alive. Like there was that room in the back that just had things and stray cats in it, and then there was the big mirror on the wall that was all dusty, and like the rafters had a very specific smell. There were like newspapers piled up everywhere, and then he had his like armchair, and he'd always be watching TV. I never knew if he was watching sports or paid attention, but he always had like
it was mostly sports, and that was his spot. So he was older. Like when he had when I was born, he was what? So I was born in '63. He was 50 years older than me.
Yeah.
So he was 50 when he had me, and then I had a younger sister and a younger brother.
Yeah. So he was like
Doug.
I sometimes think it's crazy that my dad had another kid at 53, but your dad was having kids at 53 too, so that makes sense.
Yeah. So when I grew up, he was kind of an older person anyway, but he was probably the youngest old person I've ever known. He had a tremendous vitality and a great sense of. He was obsessed for a long time with finding treasure up in the Caballo Mountains. And we went on many adventures with him looking for this cave that his friend Guy Reed, so it was one of his best friends. Guy Reed had described this place when he was out prospecting. So Guy Reed was out prospecting in the Caballos, and just to tell this story briefly, and while he was out there, he had two helpers, two Spanish helpers with him, and he came across this lady who had this map, and she was looking for this buried treasure that had allegedly been buried by Spanish conquistadors way back when. Anyway, she had this primitive map. He looked at it briefly. It looked like there was some sort of primitive horse corral where these people had hidden out. And there was supposed to be a cave behind this horse corral. Anyway, he didn't think nothing of it. He didn't really take the girl that seriously. Thought it was kind of interesting, but didn't really think about it. But then later that day, or maybe it was the next day, I don't know, they were laying back to rest, and he just kind of looked up, and he saw this kind of flat area that kind of resembled the map that he had looked at. And he began to imagine, well, this could have been kind of a primitive corral to keep your horses, and it backed up to the cliff. It was supposed to be a narrow crack. So he started kind of looking around just because this place looked kind of like the map did. And sure enough, he went back into this crack that was all full of these bushes, extremely narrow crack. The way it was described, he had to turn his shoulders to get into it. And they dug out these bushes for about 10, 12 feet back, and then this crack opened up to a larger room. And there was these two skeletons in this room.
Oh, wow.
And both had bullet wounds in the skeletons. And one of the skeletons had a military uniform on with these brass buttons. He actually took the buttons and showed them to my dad. I think he may even gave them to my dad.
What do you do with the skeletons?
He just left them there. And there was this wall that was built up like out of mud or primitive concrete in the back of the cave. And he went and he poked his shovel through it. And he got to looking through it, I think with his flashlight. And he saw what he thought was stacked up dynamite. And so he kind of backed out of there. His two helpers got freaked out by the skeletons. And they backed out. They didn't want anything to do with it. And they left with the idea of he wanted to come back one day. But then shortly after that, not too long after that, he had a stroke. And he went pretty much blind. And so he continued to tell my dad the story of this place, and my dad would go and look for it. And we had many adventures where my dad brought homemade dynamite and basically liquid nitroglycerin that he would pour, and we would blow up the side of these cracks looking for this thing, and never found it, but he was certainly convinced it was up there. And based on what I know about Guy Reed, I don't think he would ever make up a story to my dad. And later on, what he thought was old dynamite, he realized turned out to be, that's the way they stored gold. That they would pour it into these forms and stack it up in this wood, is the way I understand it. I may be screwing up the whole story. But they would pour it into these wood forms that would, and that's what he was seeing. It was stacked gold, so that looked like cylinders of dynamite. So it's a pretty interesting story.
I wonder if it's still there. I wonder if it's been
No one's
discovered
ever
after
found
all
it.
these
There
years.
are lots of rumors about gold being in the Caballo Mountains.
I guess maybe we'll have to start looking for it again.
Yeah.
No, that's a cool story. I didn't know he had this obsession with finding gold in the Caballo Mountains until I asked my mom about it just a few weeks ago. I was like, yeah, what do you remember of Beatty? And she told me that he was always looking for gold in the Caballo Mountains. A lot of the Lacys seem to, kind of like how you talked about with your dad, with the obsession with finding this gold. I feel like a lot of us have kind of this obsessive mentality that often manifests in a sort of creativity, or which sometimes develops into like a career path, and sometimes it's just like an intense hobby. But I feel like that's kind of a Lacy trait, is just kind of an intense, obsessive drive to do something. And so yeah, what's your relationship with creativity and how that's
there's a lot of there's definitely a creative vein within our family for sure. My sister Julie is an incredible artist. My sister Kat was an incredible artist. And
I just learned that she was a painter the other day, and the painting up at her house that I've seen since I was a kid, I had no idea until just the other day.
Painted that in seventh grade. Yeah,
I
seventh
had no idea.
Yeah, they would paint nature scenes and animals, and Julie really instilled that into us. So it was really incredible growing up with Julie because she really inspired our creativity, I think, and our love of nature. Yeah, but there's a creative vein, like I think in each one of us, which is really quite wild. Like I said, my sisters are artists. I grew up writing. I have a love of writing and film. My current career is a cinematographer and editor and filmmaker and writer, and I've been lucky enough to make a career out of that.
Were you a writer before you got into film? And how would that manifest? Did you like short stories or novel ideas? Or I grew up
writing short stories. I loved science fiction. I still do, and loved just really writing and visualizing. I think growing up with my sister Julie and my brother Steve. Remember, my brother Steve used to orchestrate radio shows, like with a tape recorder, and pretend it was a radio show. Remember, we did War of the Worlds one time.
I hope these tapes still exist somewhere.
I wish we could find them. They would be incredible to find. But we would imagine these Martian invasions, and we would do the sound effects, and he'd play the Beatles' Let It Be, and it kind of instilled in my mind just a love of that kind of thing. And I think that's probably why I was inspired to be a filmmaker. And
it'd be cool to read some of your old short stories from when you were younger, before you got into film or after you got into film.
I remember the first story I wrote, I was in the third grade. That was kind of a big deal because I was extremely shy when I was a kid. So I spent most of the first grade pretending to walk to school and then doubling back and hanging out in the tree or under the bed and just spending the day with my imagination. And I did not do well in front of lots of people. And so I was just genetically extremely shy. But they had an assignment where we were supposed to write a story. And I remember I wrote it on a Big Chief tablet. I remember the story. But I didn't really know how to do the adjective thing. So I would just sound it out. So I was making the sounds of werewolves and ghosts and in the middle of a third grade class, and I had everyone. I looked up from my page, and I had all these kids just staring at me wide-eyed with their mouths open, completely transfixed. And that was the first time I really came to appreciate the power of falling in love with a story and telling a story. And that story was the teacher loved it so much that she had me go the day after next, or that week, to the lunchroom, and they called all the classes down in elementary school and had me read it to the entire elementary school. And she told me that one day I was going to be a writer. And I remember.
Was that like terrifying, or was it like a cool moment?
It was a transcendent moment for me, because I went from this shy, awkward kid that didn't really speak to kind of a short-lived celebrity in Conley Elementary School.
That's cool. That's cool. That's all it took for you to get over your shyness, was just like...
I was still shy. I still am shy. But it taught me that one's creativity and one's inner life can eclipse all that.
Yeah. And how that's manifesting in current day... you have like some sort of contract to make a short film to represent sort of a longer film that you're getting super excited about. It kind of related to the family, but fictionalized and supernatural.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's an amazing project that I have just fallen in love with, and I got funding for it, so at least going to be able to do the first phase of it. So it's a short film that's basically the first scene of a feature film, and then elements of a trailer. And it's a story called The Signal. And it's actually based on a real life event that happened to me that my brother Steve did to me when I was like 8 or 9 years old. He had the storeroom in the den completely modified and fixed up as this electronics lab. So in the den, which was kind of a portion of the one big room, but it was like a storeroom. And it was kind of the most hidden part of the house, even though we had a very small house. This was kind of our getaway, our cave, certainly Steve's place. And he had an oscilloscope in there. He had amplifiers and speakers and just all kinds of electronic stuff. I was kind of transfixed by the oscilloscope, being 8 or 9 years old, this green dancing line, and then he had all these distorted sounds going into it. And he had me convinced that all this stuff was hooked up to the television aerial, the antenna that was up on the house. And he had me convinced that we were receiving signals from the planet Mars. Mm-hmm. And he had me up on the roof turning the TV antenna aerial to get the signal stronger. Mm-hmm. And for basically a couple of days, we heard this bizarre sound and watched the oscilloscope dance. And I went to school telling my classmates that we were communicating with Martians, and it was just a big joke. But for him, because he was 5-6 years older than me, and he was just playing a big joke on me. But it was amazing for me because it created this indelible memory, and that's what led to this story called The Signal. So it's based on that event, and so yeah, I'm very excited about it. And it's really kind of a picture of our lives in New Mexico in the 70s, our kids growing up in the 70s in the desert and doing weird things. So that's kind of the setting for it.
I'm excited to see what it turns into. I feel like this kind of vein of creativity and rich internal world that the Lacys have has manifested in a lot of us, or a side effect of it has been really crazy sleep things like sleepwalking or hypnagogic hallucinations like I have, sleep talking. Even Cora kind of has it, really vivid dreams. Mm-hmm. And I feel like you have that almost the most insane version of that. And I don't know, what do you think that is? And maybe describe just a little bit of how that manifests in you.
I don't know what it is, but it is something that has always plagued me since I can remember. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, my mom actually thought there was something wrong with me. She brought me to the doctor. I was very sick as a kid. I remember I got Giardia and the Gila. We drank the water out of the river, and I was deathly ill for a long time. Couldn't go to school, and I think that was and I was I think that was about 6-7 years old when that happened, and from that point, and even prior to that, I would have these extremely vivid, powerful dream states that weren't like typical dream states. So they were always overwhelmingly powerful. And I had them throughout my childhood, and I continue to have them. I had one just about a week ago. So, and they can be super scary because I always think that I can control it. But it is something that really just takes your body over. Mm-hmm. It's just this overwhelming feeling of paralysis and fear, and that you can't breathe. And I always sense that there's a presence, some sort of presence. That's what freaks me out the most, and what separates it from a normal dream is this sense that there is something else that is not you, and it's there. And it knows you're there, and it's acknowledging your presence in a way that's just freaky as you can imagine. I had one where I was by a fire that was outside. It was a normal fire initially, and I was sitting by the fire at night somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. It seemed to be a barren space with no woods. It was just this fire in the middle of this abyss. And then the fire started to get more intense, and started to shift colors to kind of from an orange to kind of a blue-green color. And then I got and initially it's a dream image, and I'm just in that dream state. But then when the fire started to change, I started to feel that paralysis, and I wanted to wake up. I was trying to force myself to wake up. And then I got this sensation of someone approaching the edge of the firelight, and it was this tall, just ancient-looking Indian with white hair, and just his face looked like he'd been outside for 1,000 years, and he just kept walking closer and closer to me. And then I noticed that he was doing some sort of chant, and it was low at first, and then it grew louder, and he just kept coming closer and closer to me. And I was trying to scream to wake up, because this was freaking me out, because this was not like a normal dream. I'm just not, these things happen, I'm just not dreaming I'm dreaming about an Indian and a fire. It's not like that. It's a different kind of sensation where I feel like I can't breathe, and there's kind of just this infinite feeling of fear, and I'm just trying to wake up. Anyway, I woke up screaming at the top of my lungs, but I wasn't screaming, I was chanting like an Indian at the top of my lungs, and woke up the entire house, which is absolutely bizarre. And I think was that the one you were referring to, or
I
the
was
one
thinking
where
about the one where you were like traveling with some film friends, but that's
we were shooting at Esalen, and I was with my friend Scott Jones and Dr. Jeff Kripal, who is a amazing writer, and he's an expert, and he's a historian of religions at Rice University. And anyways, incredible guy. We were out there working on the Esalen documentary in Big Sur. This is one of the most intense ones that I had. It's really strange. And so I don't know him. I know him pretty good, but not super well. And he had to catch a flight the next morning. And so it's like at 3:30 in the morning, and I start having this sensation of paralysis, and I sense this just this presence, and it right next to my face. And the only way I can describe it is it was like an infinitely intelligent blowtorch. It was like this mass of sound and energy, and it was pushing into my face and pushing me out, and it was coming into my body. And I know this sounds, you probably shouldn't play this for anybody. This is for you and me, right?
No, I have similar things, not
super
quite
bizarre.
this flavor, but the reason I ask about it is because I think we all have varying degrees of something like this going on, but you seem to have I
think the whole family's had these
version.
at some point, but yeah. So this thing was pushing into me, and it was like the most powerful. It was like a roaring sensation, and I had this sensation of blue, moving light, almost like there was no heat. I don't want to use fire as like I was feeling heat or anything, but it just felt like I was being put into this incredible storm of energy that was intelligent, and it was pushing me out. Anyway, I woke up screaming, yelling, and I looked up, and I was on my knees in the middle of the bed. And we were staying in a yurt. And so they had the two bedrooms, and I was out in the living room on a rollout, hide-a-bed kind of thing. And I look up, and there's Jeff Kripal, Dr. Jeff Kripal, and Scott Jones standing in their underwear with the light on. And I hear Jeff say, "Hey, should we go shake him or something?" And I hear Scott say, "Don't go anywhere near him. Don't touch him. He's told me about these things." And I woke up in the midst of a yell, and I'm looking at these two guys, and I'm just so embarrassed because I knew Jeff had to catch a plane. But he's into this kind of thing, into the paranormal, and he was super intrigued. The next morning, he just kind of asked me all about it, said I should read this book called The Terror That Comes at Night, and he said that if maybe I had been born in a different culture at a different time, I would have been probably trained as a shaman.
Yeah.
But I said that, like you said, it, and you're aware of it, runs in the family. So
Different flavors though, like yours tend to be like very like the paralysis happens and like a physical thing of taking you over seems to be a theme.
Well, that one particular time, I've never felt like I was being taken over any other time.
Yeah,
just this presence, always a presence.
And really intense fear can be a theme of mine, but it's not. I don't get the paralysis.
You don't?
I've never had the complete paralysis. I've had something kind of similar to where like I'll feel just kind of weighted down, trying to wake myself up, and it's like I'm kind of drowning or suffocating a little bit. But never completely paralyzed. But I will get hypnagogic hallucinations where I'll wake up and I won't be completely awake, but I'll be awake enough to like remember it as an awake memory. And like if someone else saw me, they'd see me as being awake and I'd remember it. And then I'll just see people or things, crazy stuff that's just
so you're actually
there.
Projecting dream imagery into the real environment?
Like, there have been times where I've woken up talking to people in the room, like actually like a couple people, and then at first it's like I feel like it's normal because I'm kind of still in that dream state, but then I realize I'm awake and there's strangers in my room and I'm like, what's going on? And then I get up and I run to the kitchen and I turn the lights on, and it isn't until I'm there that I realize like they're not real. I'm hallucinating. And I go back and they're gone.
That's crazy.
The story about your cat was interesting.
Oh yeah, I was sleeping on the trampoline and I had just gotten my 2 kittens, Lawrence and Daffodil, and I was just having like this delusion that they were on the trampoline with me, but they were inside. And I woke up and I see them there. Lawrence jumps off and I get off and I'm chasing him through the dark, like around my trampoline. And I'm about to grab it, and it wasn't until I like grabbed him and I like clapped my hands together that I realized he's not there. He's not real.
Oh man.
So, and they've been happening less lately, but I still get them every once in a while. And yeah, my dad's always doing weird stuff. Like this one time when I was a kid, I woke up in the night to like go get water, and he's sleeping on the couch for some reason. And as I walk by him, he starts going, oh, and I'm like, what? And I
he's
go
having
wake
a
him
night
out.
terror.
Apparently he was having a dream. He was pretending to be a ghost to scare off the bad guys or something like that. But
oh my gosh.
Yeah, we all have that. But this will be a good segue into I feel like you have 1 or 2 stories that have happened to you that kind of have some unexplainable elements in them. So
yes, super interesting. So I've always been intrigued with this subject. I've always been intrigued with the paranormal, with things that don't quite fit. That sometimes it seems like the universe around you shows you things when you least expect it, and in ways that that sometimes is difficult to process. The whole night terror thing kind of creates a kind of a backdrop of this background of maybe the understanding that there's a portion of the cosmos that you just don't really have a handle on, and sometimes it manifests. But yeah, let's see if I can. The one that really comes to mind recently was I have this old leather hat fairly recently, since I moved here. So I love this hat. It was a hat we got when we first moved here. And I have a love of hats. So anyway, I really fell in love with this one. It's kind of an Indiana Jones looking leather hat. And I was, anyway, there was this day that I was editing in my office and just completely engrossed with what I was doing an edit. And it was daytime, mid-morning. And I hear my wife, Stephanie, call out to me very loudly and clearly from across the house, bring me your hat. And it made me stop editing. And I actually just said, what? And then I hear very distinctly, even louder, the second time, bring me your hat. And I was going, what the hell does she want my hat for? And so I started looking around the office for my hat. I was thinking, well, maybe she wants it for Christian, but we don't have Christian, our grandkid. Thought maybe she wanted to take a silly picture with him in my hat. I couldn't fathom why she would want my hat. And after briefly looking around my office for it, I went out of my office door to go ask her what she wanted with my hat. And upon exiting my office door, you have to go across the living room to get to the kitchen where my wife was, I think she was making breakfast or doing the dishes. And anyway, there's the living room table, coffee table there. And I see in the middle of the coffee table, my hat is on top of a candle on fire. And it's like engulfed in flames. And I went and grabbed my hat, I blew it out, and went in the kitchen. I went up to Stephanie. I said, "What the hell?" I said, "What's with the hat?" I said, "My hat's on fire, and why are you calling for my hat? Why is my hat on fire?" And she turned around and she looked at me like I was the craziest person on the planet. And she had not uttered a word. She had not called out. She had not said anything. So I think what happened is the cats probably were chasing each other, and they kicked my hat up onto the burning candle, and my hat was on fire. And for whatever reason, I heard Stephanie calling out to me, but it wasn't Stephanie. So some part of my brain, and the thing is, it wasn't something like subconscious. I was smelling smoke. The door is a big, thick door in my office. It seals. There was very little smoke. The smoke detector hadn't gone off. There was no indication for me to consciously be aware that my hat was on fire by a candle. So I can't explain that. And it's to this day.
Weird. It's very weird. And especially since like Stephanie didn't say like, "Your hat's on fire." It was just like, "Bring me your hat." It was just, "Bring me your hat." It was just very odd.
Yeah, she yelled out twice, very clearly, "Bring me your hat." And then, and she thinks I'm crazy. So she's very grounded, very practical. She doesn't have these experiences. She kind of tolerates my weirdness. So yeah, and she didn't say a word. So quite strange.
That is very strange. It's an odd story. It's I feel like not all of you have these supernatural stories, but Julie has a few where I'm like, interesting, and I wonder what they mean, and I'll probably never know, but it's cool that they happened and curious.
There seems to be a precognitive component to it. I know there was one time we used to have this big fountain out in the backyard, like one of those terracotta multi-level fountains, and it never operated. But it was just this big stone structure that I always liked, and there was a night where, before we moved here, I had told Stephanie, when we came up here to look at the house, the second time we came up and I looked in the yard and I said, "Hey, they must have moved the rubble from the other fountain. They must have got rid of it." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, there used to be two fountains here." And I said, "There was one on this side by the window, and then there was one over here by the back door." And she said, No, there was never two fountains. I said, "Yeah, there was." I said, "The first time we came up here." I said, "It was knocked down and it was all like just pieces of it, but it was right there. And now it's gone." I said, "Somebody must have hauled it off." She said, "No, there's never a fountain here." And I went, I said, "Well, I must have seen it in one of the ads then, when we were looking at old pictures of the house that we were wanting to buy, of this house." And I went back and looked, and there was no pictures of a second fountain. Anyway, I forgot about it. But then we had this huge windstorm, rainstorm, and we have this trampoline in the back that I had roped down, but I had taken off a couple of the ropes. And I sat straight up in bed before I heard the sound. There was lots of lightning, and there was coming rain, and just a huge amount of wind. And I just went from a complete dead sleep, just sitting straight up. And then about 3 seconds later, I heard this huge crash. And I thought the window had broken in. That something had blown through the main living room window. So anyway, I went running out. I ran outside in the middle of this storm, and the trampoline had picked up in the wind and had smashed into the fountain and completely obliterated it. And so there I was, hanging on the trampoline, and I had to tie it back down in the storm, and there was all this rubble there. And I didn't even consciously think anything of it until the next day. I was looking out at the backyard and looking at the rubble of this fountain. It made me realize that, well, maybe what I remembered was not something that was in the past, but maybe I was seeing some element of something that was going to take place in the future. Mm-hmm. So that's
Especially
the only.
If it was never explained, like why you remembered that. I feel like, yeah.
Isn't that
odd.
weird?
Mm-hmm.
It's just the weirdest thing.
Very odd.
Yeah. I used to have dreams when I was a kid. I used to dream that I had this dream of sitting on a porch with other people, kneeling down, having to be quiet. And having to be very quiet because something was happening inside the house. Mm-hmm. It was only later on that I realized that that was a movie set and that we were being quiet because they were rolling a take. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing these guys take a big white rectangle across the yard, and a big 12-foot by 12-foot rectangle. And I was telling my sister Julie this when I was 7, 8 years old about these dreams. And that big white 12-foot by 12-foot rectangle is a 12 by silk that we use to diffuse the sun on movie sets. I remember being in a big room with these very thin walls of this place, and it had no ceiling, and I was hiding behind one of these thin walls, and we were having to be quiet again. And these were images I had as a kid in dreams that I would tell my sister about these dreams.
And that turned out to be like
vivid.
your career.
I was on a studio, on a set. I was seeing elements of my future.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. Julie, unprovoked, brought up these premonition dreams during her interview too, and she talked about how your dad had them a few times too. Mm-hmm. Like he would have dreams and he'd know something was going to happen, or like just like this gut feeling that makes you like turn around to go back home because you know something's up or something like that. Yeah. Or yeah, she definitely talked about your dad having a few uncanny premonition dreams. And I've had a few, not super uncanny. They could be like coincidental, but I remember like the day before we got a flat tire on the road this summer, I had a dream about getting a flat tire and changing it. Or like just sometimes it'll just be like this weird just thought that comes into my mind, like before the van broke down for good, I was just thinking probably 10 minutes before, like, what would I do if the van broke down? Oh. It's complicated now because we have puppies, but that thought came into my mind, and then 10 minutes later, the van broke down for good.
It's a subtle...
And we had talked about it, so like you have like witnesses.
And my mom, did Mike tell you, my brother Mike, about when he got ran over?
Yeah, he did, but...
Did he tell you about my mom?
No.
So when the school... So she had this sense that something horrible had gone on. Mm-hmm. The phone rang, and she answered the phone, and they said, this is Conley Elementary School, the nurse or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if they identified the nurse, but before they even said anything on the phone, she said, Mike's been run over. Yeah. She knew Mike had been run over. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's really weird. I wonder what that is. And I know Julie talked about, like, one time she was on her way to work and she just, like, got to turn around now. She was like, she knew something was wrong, and, like, cops were at her place and they were going to, like, shoot her dog, and she, like, saved the barking dog, and she just knew something was up. And, yeah, I've heard stories like that happen more than coincidence in our family, which maybe there's just like a weird psychic thing going on that's kind of unexplainable.
I think with creative people, there's a lot of data that supports that people who are creative artists, writers, musicians tend to have this more often than other people. So there seems to be a link between creativity and paranormal occurrences.
Just a very strong imagination, I guess.
I think you're onto something there.
blew away to find myself in a peculiar condition today. You can call the doctor and they'd be on their way, but you already know just what they'd say. There's something wrong with you, I really must confide. There's something terribly wrong with you inside. Start to watch the people as the days slowly unfurl. They dress up their funny bodies and they push them through the world, and they talk about their taxes and pretend that they don't notice that there's something decomposing lurking just beneath the surface. There's something wrong with you, I really must confide. There's something terribly wrong with you inside. Those feelings that you had caused by the nerve in your belly makes you sad. It's like practicing the method of infinite descent. I heard what you said, but I didn't catch what you meant. There's something wrong with you, I really must confide. There's something terribly wrong with you inside.
I'm going inside the hero. Leichnachtsinn meine Schleich. She's